Hello, welcome to this next ACE research review, and this time we're looking at reversing the heart's aging. So the study that we will look at here is published. It was published in Circulation back in 2018, so it's not a new article. The reason we're looking at it in this review is that there's been so much focus on muscle health and the decline in muscle strength and power as we age that maybe we've lost sight that with age we also have changes to our heart. And given that cardiovascular disease is still one of the top causes of death, it's important that we don't lose sight of how we can maintain the health of our heart, like how we can maintain the health of our muscle or musculoskeletal system as we age. So I think it's important and noteworthy. Now, this has been a highly cited study, and one of the gentlemen involved, Benjamin Levine, is a seminal publisher of research in exercise cardiology. If you see his name on a paper, it's usually worth a read. And this paper has been quoted a lot, it's been cited a lot because of its remarkable effects. And essentially, the bottom line up front is these researchers proved that it is possible to reverse some of the changes to your heart's architecture, so the size of the heart and its function, with exercise. And this was quite an impressive feat. So we'll dive into it and look at how we can use some of the findings of this study to ensure we promote good cardiovascular health. So the background to this study was the observation from some research way back in the 1960s, actually. And this is another classic study. And if you're interested, it's called the Dallas Bed Rest and Training Study. Dallas, as in the state in America. Dallas Bed Rest Training Study. So in the 60s. And they found that 3 weeks of strict bed rest, and we're talking about absolute bed rest where they even go to the toilet in the bed, in 20-year-old men, so they weren't young men, caused a greater reduction in their cardiovascular capacity, and VO2 max being one of the outcome measures, or aerobic fitness, than 30 years of aging. So in short, just 3 weeks in bed made you age faster than 30 years of being sedentary. Now, 30 years of aging, as we said, decreased VO2 max, and the rate of decline is 1% a week. So it really shows you that even within a week of strict bed rest, there's already measurable changes to the size of your heart. It gets smaller and it gets stiffer. The 3 weeks of inactivity created more severe decline in physical work capacity than decades of normal life. So it is catastrophic for your health to be laid up in bed and strictly in bed rest. So this is something that we need to be aware of, because there might be times where we're incapacitated, perhaps not to that extent, but nevertheless, note this, that bed rest is a profound stressor that causes the heart, as I said, to lose approximately 1% of its size or muscle mass per week. That's staggering. So bed rest actually acts as an accelerated aging agent. And it's a way that researchers can study the effects of age, because we know that if we find people to bed, we can observe the changes that are similar to the changes that occur with age. So just imagine what 5 to 10 or even 20 years of being sedentary, that is not being active, might be doing to somebody you know's heart. It's a really interesting thought to ponder. So we need to understand, I guess, the significant aging and what's happening to your heart as we age. One of the things that happens that we don't hear about as much is the effect of age of stiffening your heart. Now, I guess we can relate to the general concept that as we get older, we get stiffer, which is true. Well, it's even more true for your heart, and a stiff heart doesn't function very well. It loses its capacity. poor fitness is also a predictor of many serious heart conditions, including heart failure, but it's also linked to the stiffening of your heart. And this really is probably one of the strongest precursors for you to go on to develop heart failure. And that's a condition, of course, where your heart struggles to pump enough blood around your body. That's a very simple explanation. So ensuring that your heart doesn't get too stiff too early in your lifespan is very, very important. We want a big, flexible heart that can expand when it's filling with blood and then contract when it needs to eject the blood. So we want it to be like a nice, stretchy rubber band. We don't want it to be like a really stiff, old rubber band that when you pull it, it barely extends. So stiffness is an important concept to understand for your health. What it means is when your heart is stiff, it loses its ability to accommodate the blood that's coming back from your extremities. Okay, so that venous return, blood comes back to your heart. It needs to fill and expand, look like a big balloon, and then it contracts and pumps the blood out. The stiffer it gets, the harder it can do in these functions. And in addition to getting stiffer, it gets smaller. So we've got two changes that we're working against the tide a bit with age that we have to be aware of that leads to heart failure and other heart conditions. Now, this stiffening, you might go, when does this stiffening occur? Well, it tends to accelerate after 50. So in our middle ages, that's where we start to see a very big ramp up in the changes to the architecture of our heart. It gets smaller, it gets stiffer. So that's important. So there is a small amount of change happening from youth to middle age, and then it accelerates. Key point, middle age is where you see these changes. So now this stiffening continues into our older age, and then it accelerates again. So after 65 years of age, around 65, that's where we start to see that some of these changes may not actually be reversible. Now, the good news is, and that's what the study in question that we're looking at today showed, that when middle-aged older adults are put on an endurance training program, so I'm talking about aerobic training, that it is possible to start to reverse the changes. So we're talking about a cohort of people who were inactive in their middle age, who started doing an aerobic-based exercise program. And over the period of 2 years, by following the aerobic training program, they were able to reverse the stiffening and the size changes that it was occurring to their heart because they'd been sedentary. So they did this. This wasn't an acute short-term study. It was a longitudinal study. So they followed them for 2 years. And this is what made this paper so popular. It showed that it is possible to reverse the stiffening and to start to bring back the size of the heart that was occurring because of their sedentary, inactive lifestyles. So the program was successful. It reversed most of those effects, restoring essentially what we would say is a more youthful heart in terms of its elasticity and size. Now, they didn't quite get back to the heart size and flexibility of a 30-year-old, but they got close. They got close, which is really, really interesting. So that's the good news, that if you undertake endurance training regularly in your middle ages, you can prevent some of these early changes to your heart. You can literally reverse some of the, I guess we could call it damage that's been happened to your heart because you've had a sedentary lifestyle for a period of time leading into your middle age years. But there is a very, very important caveat to those findings. So yes, it's possible to reverse the changes, the negative changes to your heart whilst you're in your middle ages. But when the same group of researchers performed the same research, this time for 1 year, and this time in older adults, not middle-aged adults. So this time they looked at the same endurance training program in older adults in their 70s. They weren't able to reverse the stiffening of the heart in older adults. So one of the reasons that they think they're still trying to uncover the reasons, there could have been some questions around the study design, but nevertheless, at this point, the evidence suggests that after 65, that collagen depots, and these end glycolytic end products as well, end stage glycolytic products, which are a downstream metabolite of glucose metabolism. So if you're building up, you have high glucose, you end up with these high AGEs and glycolytic end products. And they, along with collagen, can bind in and mix in with the muscle fibers of the heart and accelerate the stiffening. And they think that this deposition of collagen and these AGEs collectively work against the exercise effect. So we cannot undo them at older adults. So a really important take home is there's a bit of a window of opportunity for you or anyone you know who's been inactive for a long time and they're now moving into, say, their later stages of middle adulthood. It's really, really important that they do regular endurance training because that's the last chance they might have to reverse some of these changes and therefore go into their older age with a more youthful heart, a heart that's a little bit bigger and certainly not as stiff and functioning more appropriately. So less risk for heart failure. So that's the important thing. Now, there was benefits, though. We should be mindful that this 1 year of endurance training wasn't a waste of time for the older adults. They still had a 24% improvement in their vascular compliance, which is important. We've got to keep our arteries flexible as we age. We want flexible arteries, like we want a flexible, extensible heart. They improved their fitness by 19%. There was a small change in the actual mass, but not the stiffening. So key point is that middle age appears to be that really important window where we can reverse some of these changes to our heart. So take homes now. Firstly, the prescription for a youthful heart. So what does this endurance training program look like that the researchers did for 2 years with the middle-aged adults that enabled them to reverse these changes in their heart and give them back many, many years of heart function and made their heart a bit younger and more youthful? So the first one is that typically, now these are recommendations from Ben Levine. So if you're interested in any of this, I do encourage you to read his work. As I said, he's a notable exercise cardiologist and having published many, many studies. And his advice is certainly well worth taking into consideration. So we've got one long session. He suggests that we need to do one moderate intensity, but an enjoyable session, which might be a game of tennis, hiking. With this would be like your Sunday activity, your Sunday active activity, something outdoors, at least an hour, ideally an hour or so, longer if you can. It should be around moderate intensity, but focus on enjoyment. That's really important. We do need to do some high intensity interval work. And in that study, they use the 4x4 interval training program. And I have spoken about that elsewhere, but just briefly, 4 minutes spent at 95% or higher of your maximum heartbeat. Ideally, you measure that through a test, not rely on 220 minus your age. And typically, people do that on an incline. So they walk on a really steep incline for 4 minutes. Their heart rate is at 95% or more of their max. They come down for 3 minutes. That's their recovery, and they do that 4 times. So 4 by 4 minute intervals. For older people and less conditioned people, it works really well just walking briskly on an incline on a treadmill. And that's what they did. So Levine says we need to do at least one of those sessions a week. Now, it doesn't have to be the 4x4. It can be any tolerable high-intensity interval training session. So we need one of those a week. Then we need 2 to 3 of our moderate intensity. This is our typical aerobic endurance recommendation. Moderate intensity, somewhere in that talk test zone where you can talk but not whistle, talk but not sing. This does sit somewhere near the zone 2 for those of you who've been following the zone 2 story a bit. There is a top end of the zone 2 and then a 5 to 20 beat lower version that Levine includes in this program. But essentially, to keep it simple, 2 to 3 30-minute sessions And then that, of course, that should be supported by 1 to 2 strength training sessions to make sure that our musculoskeletal health isn't forgotten and maintained. So that's the recipe for a healthy heart. That's the recipe for, or the dose for ensuring that your heart doesn't get too stiff as you move through middle agehood and then end up really, really stiff as you become an older adult, and then put you in line for some of these more serious cardiovascular conditions like heart failure. But the bottom line is really it's a commitment. It's a lifelong habitual endurance exercise training commitment that you have to maintain. You need to make it part of your personal hygiene. This is what Levine calls it. Make it just like brushing your teeth is part of your personal hygiene. That commitment to endurance training, really, really important. So that ends this review. We'll share the links to the papers, and I'm more than happy to take any questions you might have about some of this research and how you can optimize your cardiovascular health.